Hey, good evening, Pool Player Nation. Welcome to another edition of the Billiards Spotlight. I'm your host, Jason Bowman. If you've tuned into the show over the last couple of months, you know that each week we feature some of the top professional players from the pool world. But tonight, we're talking to a professional really on a whole nother level. This week's show is dedicated to the people on the front lines throughout the pandemic that have really kept our country running. And we're talking to one of them, one of the many APA members, really, who've been out on those front lines, making a difference since the crisis began. In early April, just as many of us were kind of settling into our stay-at-home routines, this special lady was grabbing her mask. She was hopping on an airplane, and she was heading into the epicenter of the COVID crisis in New York City. We introduced you to her on the front end of her journey here on our Facebook page, and now she's back home, safe and sound, we're happy to report, and we're very fortunate to have her with us tonight to talk about her experience. So with that, I'd like to welcome Tanya Romine to this week's Billiard Spotlight. Tanya, it is good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's good to see you. You look like maybe you've been out in the sun a little bit. You look like you've been camping maybe.
Yeah, I got a lovely t-shirt suntan line right there, sunburn right there. So yeah.
Tanya and I were talking before the show. She actually just got back from a short camping trip. So literally got back today just in time for the show. So we're happy that you're back. And like I said, we're really excited to have you join us tonight. I know you've got a captivating story to tell and to share with our audience. But let's tell everybody just a little bit about Tanya first off. Obviously you're an APA member. How long have you been playing pool? How long have you been in the APA League?
I joined APA, I think back in like 2010, 2011 on a family team just to kind of meet people and socialize. So it's been a few years.
All right. So you've been playing almost a decade, right? And you said you're a strong 3, borderline 4 kind of skill level. I know everybody says, what's your skill level? So
I'm a 4, like being 3 better, but I should be a 4. So I captain a 9-ball team. I have a co-ed 8-ball team, and I have a women's 8-ball team. And I've gotten a couple of MVPs out of those, so I should be.
Right. So so folks, she's a pool player. Multiple nights a week, captain on a team, got some MVP awards. She is most definitely a pool player. So, and I know you are a mother of 2. Is that right? You got 2 kids at home?
I have 2 boys. I have a senior who was supposed to graduate this last Sunday, 18, he's Jacob. And then I have a 13-year-old 8th grader, Gabriel.
Okay. And so what was your oldest son's name? I'm sorry. The senior?
Jacob.
Jacob. So I guess COVID has thrown his graduation plans. Has he been able to graduate yet? Does that get postponed or?
They're done with schooling. They were doing the online schooling. And so graduation has been postponed until August. And
wow.
There might be a prom sometime around then too before graduation. That's still, they don't know yet, but graduation at this point has been postponed to August.
Yeah. And how has he kind of felt about all this? When this first started, I was thinking to myself, I'll be honest, I was thinking, where was this when I was in high school? Because I could have missed some school, but then as the weeks drag on into months and, like you said, proms are canceled, graduations are canceled, spring sports are canceled. I mean, what was kind of his frame of mind with all this?
So he's a little different. He was actually playing pool league with me when he turned 18. He's kind of introverted, so he doesn't do a lot of school functions. He was actually glad, but then he was upset because he was supposed to start a job right at the same time. He just got into pool and everything got canceled. So he was kind of bummed by all of that. And of course he wants to graduate, but he's very shy. So he doesn't like a lot of attention. So honestly, it may not bother. I think it bothers me more than it would bother him. So
Probably so. So let's talk a little bit about Tanya, the nurse. How long have you been, you're a registered nurse, you're an RN, right?
Yes.
And how long have you been in nursing?
I've been in nursing for 20 years.
Wow.
Yep. This May actually will be 21 years. So I started as a CNA, of course, first. So before then, but been a nurse for 20 years.
That's, I don't know what the average tenure of a nurse is. I would think 20 years has got to be on the long side. I mean, it seems like one of those careers where you probably get very exhausted very frequently, and it's hard to maintain that longevity. Is that what's your trick there?
Well, there's, thankfully as a nurse, I have lots of options. I can do inpatient nursing, which is, you can do 12-hour shifts. You can do like clinic nursing and work 8-hour shifts. And so there's there's lots of different things you can do. Home health. I've kind of bounced around a little bit just so, I'm a firm believer if you start to get burned out, maybe it's time to find something different because bottom line, you're taking care of people and they don't want grumpy nurses. So, so that's just kind of what I've done. I've done clinic setting, I've done surgical nursing, I've done home health. So it's helped me to kind of keep everything going and keep me up on my skills as well. So.
And it sounded like when I was kind of reading the profile that Becky had put together for you, Becky's one of our producers on the show. She said you're kind of from a family of nurses. Is that right?
My sister's a nurse. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
She's younger than me. But yeah, she's a nurse and she went on to get her master's degree. So she went further on than I did. So.
Well, there's still time, Tanya. If you can make it through COVID in New York City, you could certainly make it through another level of nursing school, I would think. So there's still time. There's still time.
Yeah,
so
no.
let's set the stage for this, right? I mean, because this is a fantastic. I don't want to call it a fantastic story. It's a captivating story, of just courage and perseverance. So it's early April, right? Well, let's go back to early April. Most of us were still really trying to get our grasp around this situation with the pandemic. We're hunkered down in our houses. Our state officials or our local officials are telling us you need to stay at home. Most of us don't really know what's going on. Some of us have kids at home we're trying to juggle and our jobs. And so knowing the kind of mindset, at least for me, that I was in personally at the time, and I'm sure many of our viewers can relate to what I'm saying, I'm so curious what made you decide that in that time that you're gonna go off to New York and help with the COVID-19. I mean, I know that New York obviously was overwhelmed, and I know they kind of started waving the red flag, saying, "We need people here. We have too many issues here. We need help." And so, what goes into your decision making process that you're going to go help this situation in New York?
Well, I was kind of furloughed from my jobs because they had done eliminated the surgeries, the elective surgeries. So I was working in that role. So, you don't get your knee replaced or your back worked on if you've got a major virus or infection going on. So they canceled a lot of the surgeries. And of course, they also needed all the PPE that went along with that, the masks, the gowns and all that.
Right.
So topped all that. So I wasn't working at the time. And a friend of mine, his daughter is a nurse practitioner, and he texted me and he said, "Hey, you ever thought about going to New York?" And my first instinct and answer to him was no. And then I think that evening I got, I was sitting there watching the news, and exactly, the governor had thrown the red flag and these nurses had been in the trenches for weeks. And, I was seeing these stories on the news about they were already overwhelmed, and it kind of crossed my mind again. And so that, and then I think the next day I saw, was reading or watching online a patient talking about COVID and what was needed of them. And it just was like, you know what, why not? I'm going to get exposed to COVID here. I can go there and help out wherever and, maybe get exposed there. So that was the decision I made.
Yeah. And that's very interesting, because what you said there is the nursing work that you do back in Topeka, Kansas, which, by the way, Tanya is a member in Topeka, Kansas, of the Northeast Kansas APA. Failed to mention that. But so work, because everybody's trying to stay away from the hospitals. Like your normal nursing job, you end up furloughed. You said, right? You're not actually working,
right?
Which is interesting. Yeah. So this opportunity maybe doesn't arise except for that fact that you have the time to do this, right?
Right. We were not at our peak. I mean, I think when I left, there was maybe 20 cases in Shawnee County, if that. So we weren't really seeing a lot of it yet. And thankfully, because we're, in the middle of the country here, everybody was seeing it way before we were. So, but we were lucky enough to shut down before it really got bad here. So they weren't needing nurses. And then, people were trying to stay away from people. So.
Yeah. So you have a friend who says, "Hey, is this something you're interested in?" First, you're like, "Nah, I don't think so." But as you're watching the news, we're all watching the news. We're seeing what's happening, particularly in New York, where it seems almost like I obviously I'm not a military person. I know you haven't been in the military, but it seems almost like a war zone type chaotic atmosphere. So once you've decided that you're going to go to New York, I mean, what happens? Like, do you have to reach out to somebody call you? What's the process when a nurse says, "You know what, I'll do it. I'm here to help"?
So I posted a message on Facebook and just said, "Hey, if you were going to make so much amount of money in so much time, would you do it?" And a bunch of people were like, "No, yes." I was getting lots of answers. And another friend of mine worked for the staffing agency and said, "Hey, we're doing a 500 nurse recruit tomorrow." And so I got the number, and it was one of those call things like when you call in the radio station and you call, it's busy, hang up. You call, it's busy, you hang up. And so we had 3 phone lines going, over 5,000 phone calls, me trying to get into this line, and finally got a hold of someone. And within a 15-minute conversation, here's where you're going, here's what hotel you're staying at, I need you to fly out tomorrow, this is what we'll reimburse you, for flight. And that was pretty much the basics. So, and then they sent me a bunch of email paperwork that I had to fill out, like the tax stuff and the background check and all that jazz. But it literally was on a Friday afternoon, and I was flying out Sunday.
Wow. So within the span of 48 hours, you're not only, you decide to go, you contact them, and they say, "Sure, let's go." And now you're off. What does you've got a husband at home. You already talked about your 2 sons. What does the family think about kind of this thing that you're doing? I got to assume they're a little scared. I have a wife and children. I would imagine they would be frightened if I told them I was going to do that. So what does the family think at this point?
Well, yeah, that's a good thought. It happened so fast that I really didn't have time I didn't tell a bunch of people. And so all of a sudden, because I didn't think I was going to get the call and get in. And so I posted it again on Facebook saying, "Well, I guess I'm going to New York." And so that was how my mom found out, poor lady. And so right away she's calling me, texting me saying, "No, don't go." And, she's getting tearful on the phone. And then all of a sudden I started getting messages from friends. My husband, I don't think it really kind of sunk in yet on him, but he was a little nervous about it. My 18-year-old, when I was flying out, he actually got pretty upset and had to call his grandma to come over and talk to him because he got it. He understood that I was going into a hot zone and I may get sick and may not come back. And so he was pretty tearful. My husband was pretty tearful. And then I started getting tearful because I was, saying, "Okay, here's passwords to this. And if for something happened, because it was all unknown. So I was super scared about it as well. So the family was very scared. I had one friend who texted me and said, "Well, I hope you have a lot of life insurance." And yeah, that was kind of oh God. So then I started crying because it was like, you know what, you're right. And then it started thinking about, okay, maybe I should have a talk about what should happen before it. So, and then my aunts and stuff were calling saying, "Please be careful. I wish you didn't go, but of the nurses in our family, you're the strongest to do it," and stuff like that. So they rallied around me because they knew I was going regardless. So
now at some point in this 48-hour process between the time they tell you, "Hey, yeah, we're going to bring you to New York," and you're on an airplane, or maybe even on the airplane. I've been on a lot of flights where there's a lot of time to do some thinking, right? I mean, does fear start to creep in for you? Are you thinking, maybe this is too much, maybe I shouldn't have done this?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially after that text I got, I was, going, "Oh my God, what if I get sick down there? No families there. They don't let families in anyways. And now all of a sudden I'm going to maybe be in a patient mode and die alone." I got real fearful. I did not sleep that Saturday night before, the flight on Sunday. And I don't think family slept very much either. So yeah, I was super scared.
I would imagine that was a very scary thing for the family, very emotional. So you've got to go get on an airplane now on Sunday. What is, I mean, again, under normal circumstances, I fly about, every few weeks, maybe once a month. I can't imagine being on an airplane right now. What was that like? Just the matter of getting to New York.
Yeah. So, I kept thinking in the back of my head, this is either going to be the best thing I've ever done in my life or the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And so getting on that plane, actually, my husband dropped me off kind of, at the airport door because they don't let you through security otherwise. And sitting there kind of alone, it was like, oh God, I'm doing this by myself already. Already I'm by myself. I don't have that support system. And then I'm, on the plane, I didn't have a surgical mask with me at the time. I just had a cloth mask. And so I was a little nervous about, you're in an enclosed thing that's air is being circulated and, am I going to catch something? But there were 6 people on the plane, I think, maybe 5 people on the plane. So I literally had a whole row to myself. I could stretch out and just kind of try and decompress and watch a movie while I was going.
Yeah.
But in the airplane, like the runway, I could count at least 50 Delta airline planes just loaded down a runway. I mean, I took a picture of that, just of the amount of planes that you just saw next to each other. It was just a ghost town. Landing in JFK, besides the people that were on my plane, there was absolutely no one in any of the airport terminal areas. It was just ghost town, like you were in a closed airport. It was really weird.
Yeah, I can't imagine having been to JFK. I can't imagine it being just kind of an empty building. That would be very eerie, I would imagine, and would probably, if you were having anxiety or concerns about what you're doing, I'm sure that didn't help to get there and see that it's different. Things are different here.
The city that's always hustling and bustling, and there, I can walk into Times Square, and as you can see maybe on the pictures, there's like 2 or 3 people in all of Times Square around me. And so that was like, oh my gosh, this is real. There's no one around. So,
yeah. So so when you get to New York, are you in Manhattan? Are you like in the city? Where are you staying? Where are you working?
So I'd never been to New York before. And so, when I'm getting in the Uber, I'm like, oh, I'm going to New York. And he's like, man, and I was like, Times Square. So, because I didn't really realize, all the boroughs and all that jazz. But yeah, we were literally 50 yards away from our hotel was on Times Square. Some of the rooms actually had Times Square views. So we were right in the middle of Times Square. The ball that dropped the building was a block from the hotel. So we were right there, and I'd never been there before. And so it was kind of neat to see everything without a bunch of people everywhere. So.
Yeah, and so what was New York City like? I mean, was that a ghost town as well? Were the streets empty? I mean, it's funny that you were in Times Square, because right as this thing began, I happened to pull up a webcam. I got a good friend in Brooklyn. I pulled up a webcam at Times Square to see what it looked like, and it was completely empty, almost like the end of the world, like, kind of zombie apocalypse, like it was empty. Was that what your experience was like when you saw it?
Absolutely. So the bridges, the tunnels, I mean, just no traffic whatsoever, no real foot traffic. I mean, they still have a large homeless population there. So of course there was some people out, but there were absolutely, it was a blessing and a curse. There were absolutely no stores open except for CVS, Target, and Walgreens. So you couldn't even buy souvenirs. And so blessing and a curse. I could also go to Central Park, and there would be like 10 people, in the vicinity of the area that I was in. So, I mean, they were taking it for real, they were doing what they were supposed to do, which is amazing. The citizens there. So, and I've never been there before, but I mean, it's a concrete jungle. Like, like you see, there's no green grass and people on top of people, but they were doing what they were supposed to do, staying home and not getting out and about. So
you get to New York, and then what happens from there? I mean, do you get assigned to a hospital? Did you know what hospital you were going to? What's that process like between the time you arrive in New York and you start working?
Okay. So I got there kind of late in the evening. So that night, just my free night to kind of get settled in. The next morning I had to be up and dressed and ready to go at 5:45 in the morning, because that's when we checked in. So we signed this log. I mean, payroll is not what you would think it would be. We would get badges and swipe and do all this. No, we literally just signed our name to a piece of paper, and there's 3,000 nurses in the hotel I'm at, and they're all signing their name, and that's how they were getting paid for the day. So I checked in at 5:45. There were no assignments that day because, we flew in on the weekend, and to make our assignments, actually the New York hospital system made our assignments for us, and then just told the staffing agency, Tanya Romine's going here, so-and-so's going there. So I had a free day. And then the next day I found out, got up again at 5:45 the next day in the morning, signed in, they all said the same thing. We have no assignments yet. So there's a lot of nurses getting paid just to sit in the hotel the first day and a half, 2 days. So it was kind of nice because I got to go and get like all the essential supplies that I was going to need, because there was no refrigerators in the rooms, no microwaves in the rooms. So you had to kind of have like snack stuff to eat. And then at 2:30 that afternoon, I found out I was working night shift at 5:45.
Oh,
so, sorry, 6:45. So I've been up all day, and now all of a sudden, guess what? You're working night shift in the hospital.
Yeah. And what is that shift like? Is that a 12-hour deal, right? 12-hour shift?
12 hours. So we got on the bus at 6:45, got to our location at whatever time. I think our bus ride was about a 45-minute drive. And then we did our 12-hour shift, and then we got back on the bus and took a 45-minute ride back to the hotel and did it all over again the next day. So yeah,
and you said you were at they assigned you to Coney Island Hospital, right? Which is kind of out by the water. Correct.
Okay. We had, honestly, I'm not really for sure all the locations again, but there were, I think I took a picture of it, but there were like at least 8 to 10 facilities that we had. We had 4 hotels. And so I'm pretty sure there was probably 8 to 10,000 registered nurses in New York City helping out all the hotels. So
holy cow. So everybody in the hotel is nurses, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, there were, in our hotel, we had, we had National Guard staying there. We also had, there were some airline people staying there too, but the National Guard was there, and they had these dogs, therapy dogs with them, which was so cool, because then we can at least decompress on some days. Those dogs were there, you could go and pet them. But there were nurses, there were EMTs, there were respiratory therapists. There were nurse practitioners that were working as nurses instead of nurse practitioners. I think we had a few doctors in that group as well. So any kind of medical licensed thing were there.
So once you get assigned to the hospital and you get to the hospital, you said you're like a home health care nurse and
surgical.
But there's got to be some things that you do. You went through nursing school 20 years ago. Like, are there certain things? Nurses are trained in different areas. So like you guys are all kind of thrown into just like figure it out nursing, or how does that work with the actual tasks you're doing?
Well, in nursing, we have a line that kind of just says sink or swim. And so, when you're in nursing school, yes, you do learn textbook things. You do procedures on mannequins and maybe even do some hands-on stuff with patients in your, what they call clinicals. And so, yeah, absolutely. There were things that I had forgotten that I had to kind of relearn and crash course. You get online to the ANA websites, the Academy of Nurses websites, and critical care nursing websites, just to kind of refresh your brain. So YouTube's kind of, so to speak, just in nursing language, just to kind of freshen up a little bit. Of course, if you felt very uncomfortable and, they gave you a ventilated patient and you haven't ever used a ventilator, they're not going to put you with that. They're going to find something else for you. But you definitely had to learn to sink or swim a little bit. So.
Wow. And so was there any kind of orientation? How does everybody get on the same page when you're bringing in a bunch of new personnel into an existing operation? How does everybody kind of get up to speed? What did that all look like?
So that first day that we were unassigned, they gave us a email link to do their online computer system. So generally, if you start a new job as a nurse, you spend at least 2 or 3 days going over all the computer charting and things. We got a 90-minute crash course online, kind of like with a PowerPoint on how to use their computer system. That first day, we had orientation on kind of what our staffing expectations were And then when we actually got to the hospital, they took our picture and said, okay, we'll give you a badge soon. Here's your mask, and here's where you're going to be working at, and here's the person you go to if you need help. And that was pretty much it. So the scary things of like in a hospital setting, well, where's their supplies at? Where's their bathrooms at? Where's this if I need this for a patient? Where do I take a patient to x-ray? Those things you have no idea. You just kind of had to ask and do the best you could. So
wow,
that was super scary because it was like, oh God, I don't know if I'm going to do this right. I mean, I wasn't worried about taking care of a patient. It was all the other logistic stuff that you had absolutely no idea how to do. And the charting, well, I'm going to do the best I can. Sorry.
Yeah. So. You said something about they assigned you a mask. And I know at this time, back in April, early April, there's all kinds of personal protective equipment shortages and things like. So are they giving you equipment? Are they giving you limited equipment? What is that? I mean, the mask, what's that look like?
We got an N95 mask, which are kind of turquoise, and they're that hard shell that goes around the nose and the mouth. And our staffing agency actually gave those to us. Those were not from the hospital system, but from the staffing agency. And you have to get fitted for it so that they make sure that there's nothing getting in between you and the mask. And so it's super tight. And I think maybe one of my pictures had you could see the ring around the mouth from wearing it all the time. But the hospital then gave you, based on where you were at, we called them bunny suits, the head to toe suits that you wore, the face shields, depending upon where you were at. And so the face mask, you had it for 5 days. There was no, I've worn it once, here you go, throw it away. Oh, I wore it once, put it in a decontamination room. It was put it in a brown paper bag and do the best you can not to touch the inside of it because you're going to have it for 5 days. And take it back with you to your hotel room every day.
Wow.
So that was kind of like a game of operation when you're trying to put it in the bag and not touch the sides and not, and so that was kind of like, oh God, I hope I'm not a dumb nurse and I screw this up. And then, the bunny suits, if they weren't torn, you were wearing them multiple days. Tape it up if it was torn. So in the beginning, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, is this really how we're doing things? You're wearing the same gloves for several procedures. But then as things, all the red flags were going up everywhere and please send supplies, it got better after about 10 days or so. But that first 10 days, it was do with what you got. So.
Wow. And so what does the hospital scene look like? I mean, I would imagine it's got to be somewhat chaotic with the amount of people, and you've got all these new people that don't necessarily know the hospital. Everybody's got a mask on. I mean, how do you even tell who's who? Just describe for us kind of the hospital scene, what it looks like, what it feels like when you get there.
Absolutely. So it was first off, I'm used to working in a small hospital setting where they have 4,000 staff members over 30 clinics and an entire hospital. And then you come to these systems and they've got 15 floors and, it's a much larger deal, but they were converting operating rooms into patient rooms, ICU rooms. There were patients in hallways just divided by they hung up sheets. The mess, I'm kind of a neat freak. And so for me, one of the overwhelming things was just the mess, the amount of stuff everywhere. And so in the beginning, people were like 4 feet apart. And it didn't really necessarily matter whether they were positive or negative for COVID, because that's just how much that hospital was overrun. And then eventually it slowly, backed off. So it wasn't as, thankfully that, people were getting better, or maybe there wasn't as many COVID patients. It was getting better. So, but in the beginning it was chaotic is the best way I can describe it.
I can imagine. And you mentioned some of the equipment. I know, like when we were talking, you had some issues as far as like, you're in a hotel and nothing's open really in New York. So like you're doing laundry, you're cleaning your scrubs in your bathtub in the hotel. I mean, how are you eating? And I mean, how are you surviving day after day?
Well, how was I eating? I was eating like crap. I mean, there was thankfully there was Grubhub and Uber Eats. And so, you ordered from them and they brought it to your hotel. Otherwise, you were eating what you can buy at CVS, Walgreens, or Target. And so there were 3 microwaves for the entire hotel. And so, you know, if you went down there, hopefully at a time nobody else was using the microwaves, because most of the stuff we had to buy was microwavable because we didn't have refrigerators. I kind of just, you know, used a makeshift cooler because all the coolers were sold out too. Not only do you have all these nurses, you have National Guard there too that don't have any supplies. And so Target was sold out of everything. Walgreens was sold out of everything. And so you just kind of had to make do. And so I did spend a lot of money on Uber Eats, unfortunately, but because that's all you had time for. You know, you could do other things while you're waiting on your food to be delivered. And the laundry, I mean, there was a laundry service at the hotel, but they charged $10 for a pair of shorts, $12 for a pair of pants. And so, you know, I'm not doing that for 30 days.
You would have thought you would have thought they might have cut you guys a break on that, but well.
Yeah.
It is New York City, and it's a different place in that regard. There's no doubt. If you've never been to New York, everything is very expensive. There's no way around it. So
definitely expensive. And, you know, after a long shift, I was super tired. And there were times it's like, I don't want to do my laundry. I want to just go to bed. But you got to do what you got to do. So.
Yeah. And so you worked, I mean, you said your shifts were 12 hours. So when you start on a Sunday, which would have been like the 5th?
The 5th or 6th. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you proceed to work until like how many days? Is there a weekend? Is there a break? Is there?
So I originally had signed on for a 21-day stint. So it's 21 days straight. And so, of course, I thought, oh, my gosh, halfway through, there's no way I'm going to be able to do 21 days. But miraculously, I did. And then about, I don't know, day 18, 16, somewhere in there, they asked me if I wanted to stay on for 8 more weeks. Of course, I said no to that. But I agreed to 3 more weeks. And they also put me in charge on that unit. But then all of a sudden things were getting better. They were closing down some of the makeshift hospitals. They were sending that ship that was out there in the harbor out. And so our unit was one of those makeshift units. And so they didn't need us anymore. And so my decision was then, do I get a new assignment and go to another facility and do it all over again? Or do I go home? And that was pretty nerve-wracking for my husband. I know he couldn't sleep that night and was super nervous. And the hardest part for me was just getting to know everything, getting to know the policies, where everything's at, how everybody works together. And so I didn't want to have to go through that all over again. So I went home on day 24.
Wow.
25, day 25.
So 24 straight days of 12-hour shifts. That's pretty remarkable to be able to, I mean, I really can't imagine. So I'm curious then, we talked a little bit about the hotel, or the hospital, the scene in the hospital. What does patient care look like? I mean, there's people all over the place. I mean, you're dealing obviously with patients that have COVID. I assume you're losing patients. I mean, are we losing? You know, some are not staying, some are, you know, unfortunately lost to passing away, or how's that?
Yeah. So kind of in the peak of things, I can't remember if I was a week in or quite where I was at, but I remember watching the news and, you know, like there were 600 deaths that day in New York City. And so it was very normal to have 1 to 3 of your patients die a day, a shift. And so if patients did survive from COVID, you know, it was weeks. They had it for 6 weeks, you know, 8 weeks. And so I didn't ever get to, unfortunately, see my patients get healed enough to be discharged. Some were on ventilators, some were not. Some patients, you know, like would come in through the ER, would have COVID, but they had mild symptoms and would get sent back home or get sent. They had some makeshift hotels that they would get sent to. So the hotels then had nursing staff to take care of these COVID patients so they wouldn't go back home and infect their families. So they had some of that, but patients could turn really quickly. I had a walking patient one day, was in her room, and then I think it was 45 minutes to an hour, no more than an hour, I'd come back and she must have just passed and she still had tears rolling down her face. So people turned quickly and got sick quickly. So it was emotionally very rough.
I'm sure. And how do you, it's emotional to hear that story. How how do you manage to do this again every day, day after day? I mean, are you just kind of in a zone where you're like blinders on and you're just all adrenaline pushing you, or how do you deal with that emotionally?
Thankfully, I made lifelong friends there, and thankfully I had, people that, we confided in each other. We talked to each other what was going on. Like I said, we did have those therapy dogs there, so that was kind of nice. In the moment, what do? You try not to put a bunch of tears, because you're going to fog up everything. You're not going to be able, I have glasses, so I ain't going to be able to see anything. So I've got to get myself together. Maybe go to a bathroom area so I can take my mask off for a second and just kind of decompress. It was tough. Let's just say that it was certainly tough.
I cannot imagine how difficult that would have been. And so one of the interesting things too that I saw in some of the notes that Becky had given me is, the other thing about a lot of these patients, they're in the hospital alone. They can't have people with them. So you're not only, I mean, you're a nurse, but you're also helping people like communicate with family. I mean, I know you're talking about you're holding phones, you're helping people FaceTime. I mean, what was that like to kind of be in the middle of the communication channel?
Well, I felt very blessed and fortunate that I could be there to help them in that time of need, because I cannot, I've been a patient. I couldn't imagine being somewhere without having anything allowed, or just with the nurse and yourself locked in this area. If it's a room, if you were fortunate enough to have a room, if not, just a curtain pulled area. And so, yes, there were patients that you had to do total care on. Patients that were ventilated, you had to do total care on. Of course, they were out. But yeah, I would hold phones for them so they can FaceTime. If they didn't have a phone, I would let them borrow mine. But you were doing total care for them, because some of them were just so weak that they couldn't do anything.
Wow. One of the positives that we talked about the other night when we had our first conversation was, you said when you guys were going into your shifts, you guys would load up on a bus, you and the other nurses, and you had a bus driver, and you guys would kind of crank up the music, and you guys would kind of all get pumped up and ready for the shift. I mean, that to me, that was like, you know what, there had to be so few of positives, but certainly that had to be one, and a memorable one at that. What was that like?
Absolutely. I mean, we became family. There were 25 of us on at our unit. And so we kind of became family. And so absolutely the bus, it was like a party bus without the alcohol. We were just kind of hanging out, dancing, singing a little bit, just trying to get amped up for our shift. And so, we had each other, which is great. We weren't doing this alone. And so, and our bus drivers, they were also not from New York City. There was a group of people that volunteered to be bus drivers for all of us. So that was kind of neat too. They were all experiencing something different too. So
yeah, you're seeing kind of the best of humanity there. Were all the nurses, I mean, at least the ones that you kind of interacted with, did they all make it through like their time there, or was it too much for some after a while and they just said, I can't?
Yeah, in our group, we stuck together pretty good, and nobody went home early. I mean, several went home at the 21-day mark, but then several opted to stay, another 8 weeks. In fact, I do have a couple of nurses that are still there that went to another facility after that so many days. But
wow.
I had a friend that came with me. She was on a different plane than me, and she got a different assignment than me. But she had a rough go. And she made it maybe 6 days and said, I can't do this. And she went home. So it really just depended on, the facility you were at. The nurses and the staff that were in New York City, like I said, they were dealing with this for weeks before we got there. There was no such thing as, do you want to work overtime? It was mandatory for them. So here we are, we're coming in. We know we're going to work 21 days straight, but we also know we're going to get paid really well to do that. And so these nurses, their regular pay, made to work these hours. And so some facilities were rough on the agency staff. They were like, this is our home. What are you doing? But other facilities were very, thankful that we were here. And so it just kind of depended on where you were at too. So,
yeah. With all the, obviously with all the exposure to the patients, I mean, I know you guys had safety equipment that you used. Were nurses and medical personnel being infected as well? I mean, did you know nurses that ended up getting COVID?
Yeah, I knew of several that were quarantined in our hotel in Times Square that were agency nurses. So I'm sure, regular staff nurses were getting it too. But yes, absolutely. People were getting COVID. They were being quarantined in the hotel in New York City and having to be, people bring them food and that kind of thing as well. I didn't hear of anybody getting really sick to where they were in the hospital setting, but I think they did have some in another hotel that got sick enough that they were hospitalized. But I don't know, when all that stuff kind of goes on, you don't really, they don't go around and announce it to everybody. So It's kind of word of mouth. And so I knew there were some, but I didn't really know numbers.
Yeah, I'm sure talking about that too much would be very difficult on morale, which sounds like it was already, very difficult just to begin with. So once you've gotten through the 24 days, what does coming back to Kansas look like then? Like, I assume you did not get COVID. You remained healthy, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I was tested the day I was leaving, and I chose to do that at my expense just because I wanted to know coming home what I was going to be bringing with me. Believe it or not, I was kind of surprised there wasn't some kind of security check at the airport saying, hey, have you had a fever? Or have you had this? And so I thought that was kind of odd. And then in Kansas City, I thought maybe I was going to be stopped once I got off the plane and, asked a bunch of questions. But no, it was just like I'd gone somewhere and came back. And so I did have my family bring my car back to the airport the night before. So that way, I'm not in a car with somebody and possibly, sick with something, so I could drive myself back home. And I had an RV that I could stay in at my house. And so I had that all prepared and ready. But then a day or 2 days after I got home, I was negative. So I didn't have to stay in there very long.
Okay. So you initially were going to quarantine, and then you got
correct.
The results of your test that said you're good to go. And so you didn't have to. Well, that's a very positive thing.
Yes. I think some states were still requiring people to do the 2-week quarantine, even with, I think they had to have 2 tests that were negative, but that test is super brutal. So I wouldn't really want to do that twice. So I was fine. I didn't have any symptoms and I was tested negative. So I stayed home. I wasn't out and about running around, but at least this way I could see my family, hug my family, I wasn't some zoo animal in an RV saying, hi, how are you? So.
And how has it been since you've gotten home? I mean, were you able to like really rest up? Did you crash for, like 2 days straight? I mean, how is, and just the mental toll, I mean, we you hear about soldiers and things that come back from kind of chaotic situations, and mentally it's very difficult. Has it been okay coming home and after everything you've seen, and have you kind of adjusted all right?
Yeah, I mean, I was very appreciative of family, and I kind of learned a little bit, when you're doing your day-to-day, you kind of forget some of that just connections with people. And so, I had a friend or a family member who had someone pass away. And so I was, sending texts daily, like saying, hi, thinking of you, just really appreciating the value of friends and family. It takes something like that sometimes to wake you back up a little bit and really appreciate things. So I was grateful that they were there, and my kiddos one of my kiddos was glad to come home. So, yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that as a society we are going to appreciate as the world starts to kind of open back up. I was curious, have you stayed in touch with any of the nurses that you were with? I mean, do you think you'll continue to communicate with them? I don't know, like if they were from your area or different parts of the country, but what's that look like?
I've met nurses from, several different states, and actually there are 4 of them that I'm really close with that we're actually already planning a trip to North Carolina here. Hopefully we can do that sometime this summer where we can all get back together again. Because like I said, we did kind of make lifelong friends, or at least it feels that way. So.
Nice. Well, that's cool to hear. And so things have changed quite a bit. You said you got home around May 5th or 6th, somewhere thereabouts. We're a few weeks past that now. And the world is kind of, starting to gear back up, ramp back up. People are out and about. Are you a person that's kind of getting back out into the world, and what does that look like for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone to the grocery store but things like that. I actually even, went and ate out at a restaurant, I think 2 or 3 days ago. You know, I'm going to go out as long as I practice, good hand hygiene. I've got my hand sanitizer. I'm washing my hands. I mean, I still wear a mask when I go out, obviously, except for eating, and maybe it's more for security for me than anything. But, I think about it more. So like, you're going into Walmart and I'm like, hey, kiddo, here's some hand sanitizer for you. Where before I probably wouldn't have paid attention to his hands, but now I'm
Right.
like, here's some hand sanitizer. So, I'm not going to stay cooped up in the house. But I'm also going to be smart about it. I'm obviously not going to go hang out with 50 people in a small area because you never know.
Right.
But again, if you're going to get it, you can still do all those things and still get it. So I'm just trying to be as careful as I can and still try to live my life. So.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting dynamic right now. I mean, people are having to make that choice every day, regardless of, if it's to go to the store or to do something they enjoy doing or whatever it is. We actually have some leagues that have started back up, maybe about 20 now throughout the country. I don't think your league has not yet started in Northeast Kansas. Maybe they said maybe June, sometime in June. So I'm curious, are you a person? I mean, you're obviously a big pool player. Are you ready to go back and play when the opportunity is there?
Absolutely. I'm ready. I mean, you don't know what anybody else is, what they've got going on, but you know how to safeguard yourself. So, I know how to put hand sanitizer on in between each shot if I have to, when you need to. And I'm, going to wear a mask if that's still kind of what's going on. So I'm not scared to play pool at this point. So.
Well, that's good to hear.
I think scared because I've already kind of been in the thick of things and the fog of COVID. So if I didn't get it there, I think I'll be okay here. But if I do get it here, I'll be kind of mad because I've been there exposed there more than here. And I get, so.
Yeah, there's been a real outpouring of support for healthcare workers, frontliners, not just healthcare, but, grocery workers and delivery people and just all the people that are continuing to work through this while a lot of us are able to stay home. And I'm sure you've seen some of this. Obviously, we put the post out on the Facebook page back in April when you headed out. And I'm sure at some point somebody reached out and said, hey, have you looked at Facebook? Like, you're all over Facebook. I mean, what is that like for you? I mean, what kind of feelings does that bring out for you?
Well, I totally geeked out. I'm going to be honest with you. I was like, oh my God, okay, I'm on national whatever. And so, I mean, I definitely I didn't do this to seek out, any kind of attention. And so, at first when I was getting those messages saying, thank you, you're a hero, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just a nurse doing my job, It took a little while for that to sink in, but, and that's just it. I mean, we're nurses. That's what we do. That's what we're trained for. These people that are working, at grocery stores and wherever else, they're not trained for that. They have absolutely, they don't have the education that says, this microbe can fit through a mask at this, and, you don't cross-contaminate gloves and, do those kinds of things. And so, honestly, they're a little bit more at risk than we are because we have the equipment that we need. We have the education behind that to know to kind of, stay away from it. So I appreciate them 100%, the people that are out there on the front lines doing those kinds of things. And so when I heard it, thank you so much, I'm just like, I'm just doing my job. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think I can speak for not only Pool Player Nation and APA, but pretty much the general public that we all thank you for everything that you've done and all the frontliners have done to keep this country moving. Because if you remember at the beginning of this, people started worrying about is are we gonna have access to food? Are we gonna have access to these things? And these people have kept the country running, and so we are just so grateful for Tanya's contributions and all you folks that have continued on. So Tanya, I also have one other person that wanted to be able to thank you personally. She's actually from New York City. She's got family there, including her own mother. And when I mentioned, kind of what we were doing, and she had heard about the show tonight, she insisted on making a guest appearance. and hopefully she's going to show up somewhere there in the background if Steve can work his magic. Do we have a special guest? There she is. So, folks, we got Tanya. This is the Black Widow, Jeanette Lee, and she wanted to come on and say thank you.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Hi, I'm so sorry. I was actually following along, but I just wanted to tell you that I was just so touched by your story, and I'm really thankful to APA because they understand and appreciate how many of us pool players are out there and actually in the front line. And I was listening to your story. That's what that sound was in the background, and it was. Except there was I was just listening to how humble you were about your sacrifice. But I think I remember that. So I don't know if you know, but I'm born and raised in New York. So my whole extended family, yeah, they're all in New York. And I'm getting a little emotional about it, but it was very, very scary when this first broke out and how strong it was in New York. And then I was actually dealing with my own illnesses and here in Tampa, and I was in the hospital. And I was so worried about my family in New York and just seeing how devastating it was there. And it's not like you weren't having problems in Kansas, you know what I mean? Yeah. But, you know, you saw the need, and just because there was some financial gain by it doesn't mean that you weren't risking your life, you know? And we just really appreciate you. And I know that they know that I'm a sucker for people that are givers, and I just really shared their opinion of you and the importance of bringing some of this to light, because I think that it's not just about the frontline workers. I think that it's really when everything went down with 9/11, again, in New York, right? Yeah. And all this went down, and my mom has been an RN for the last 45 years. And so, and all of my life. And she was in Kings County Hospital. And even though that was in Brooklyn, it made its way down to Brooklyn, and seeing the wrath of all that and seeing my families and friends that I was born and raised with pick their lives back up. And after that, I think that all of our firefighters and our law enforcement and our rescue workers, we appreciated them before, but what a spotlight it put on. Really, this is their everyday. It's their job. You know, it's what we do. And they were just as humble. I mean, they were just as humble. But at the end of the day, it's like, wow, we had no idea. But because it was something like, you know, as massive as it was, it brought that appreciation, you know, 1,000-fold. And I feel like the appreciation we have for you in the front line. And also, I mean, with me, I have 6 children. And we have 4 kids still at home and in school, and trying to manage all that, the appreciation we have for teachers. But with you, it was even more so, because it hit home so deeply for me on so many, you know, so many different levels. But I when I was in the hospital and they were there and they were taking risks, and I said, you know, I hope that everyone can do everything they can so that you guys get the attention and the gratitude and the rewards that you deserve. And so APA taking the time, they could have just been ready for League to Star, whatever, but for them to go, no, there's more than that, you know, and we care more than that. And that it's not just a league, it really is a family that deeply cares. And I know that a lot of the league players out there don't necessarily hear it, but before I bought the Tampa Bay APA, I've been the national spokesperson, and I've been behind, you know, the big doors, listening to their concern and their desires and how much they care and how much they listen. And so, you know, hearing your story, and I just personally really wanted to thank you. And I'm looking at your picture. I'm sorry if it looks like I'm not looking right at you, but
I'm doing the thing. So
anyway, this I don't know if, but if you ever want to come out to Tampa, or if I see you in Las Vegas, as long as I have just a little bit of heads up, or, you know, the next time I'm in Kansas, but I would love to spend the day with you and play some pool. And, you know, if you have the time, or if you just want to have me be your rack girl and I could work with you on your game, you know, from free lessons if you don't want to play me, or if you want me to put on a wig and we can go give somebody at your work a hard time and trick them just for fun, you know. I think that would be cool. But I really mean it. I'm really thankful to you, and I'm thankful to the APA for, you know, for doing this. So please don't be as humble. I think that you have to be right where we are at. And no, if I can be part of making it even louder, you know, the service that you guys do to help those that are sick or in need, or, you know, I think it's a great thing. And I don't think that that should be diminished. Not to disagree with you, but I appreciate your humbleness, but I don't know. Anyway, I thank you. And I totally give them, you know, the right to have my personal cell phone number, and, you know, just reach out to me and we can make it happen. And that's on me. But again, way more credit to APA and you about this. And, you know, I was very proud to be a spokesperson for APA, because I know a lot about how much they care. I mean, not just that it's important that it be more about fun. Yes, competition, and yes, getting better at pool, but also having fun and meeting people and doing this environment. And, you know, I want you to be proud. I want you to be proud of who you represent right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, my APA family has actually been really great. That was part of the reason why I joined pool playing, is just because to meet people and so I can go anywhere in town and say, oh, hey, how are you? And I didn't know hardly anybody before I joined, and we sacrifice together, we celebrate together. We are a community, and I absolutely love it. And so thank you. Your support means everything. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Jeanette, we certainly appreciate you hopping on and helping us to thank Tanya. Tanya, we really do. We thank you not only for joining us tonight, but for your perseverance, for your courage, you know, for your skills, and for what you you've really done to help your fellow man. To our frontliners, all of you out there that are tuning in or that will see this video, we want to make sure that we thank you as well. Again, this country cannot keep rolling the way that it has without the contributions that you've made. So thank you all very much. And to our audience, we appreciate you guys joining us tonight. And we will see you next time on the Billiard Spotlight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.